Today's daf we're going to be learning is Kiddushin Daf Lamed Gimel. Today's daf is sponsored by Terry Kervosha and Rabbi Chaim Herring to mark the end of Shloshim for Terry's mother, Cheni Mindel Bat Yerachmiel HaKohen B'Shima Fega. Today's daf is sponsored by Caroline Ofstein and Medina Korn in loving memory of Helen Abelis Zichronah Lebracha, her Shloshim. She was a dearly cherished friend who gifted us with her strength, wisdom, inspiration, and incredible emunah, and she's sorely missed by the many who loved her. Yehi Zichra Baruch. We're going to get started today. A very interesting daf, as all these dafim have lots and lots of interesting things to them. We're now talking about an elderly person, or the commandment, we should actually say, mipnei seva takum, you should get up, stand up for an elder, and v'hadarta pnei zaken, and you should do hidur, which again, it's not exactly clear what hidur means. We'll talk about it as we go on, for the face of a zaken. So we have a seva, we have a zaken. What we discussed yesterday was this big machloket. Who exactly is this referring to? First of all, it's often in psukim where you have a repetition here. The question is, what's the meaning of the repetition? Are these two different characters, the seva and the zaken? Are they just synonyms that are referring to the same type of person? And for this, we had a three-way debate. Who is this referring to in the pasuk? We had Tadakama, who said, we're referring to an elderly zaken. In other words, it's all one person who's both seva, has older in years, zaken, older in wisdom. Okay, so we have the combination of the two. And generally, when we say zaken, we mean generally, although we'll talk about this today, if this is really only the case, a talmid chacham, okay, someone who's wise in Torah ways, but perhaps it also means wise in other ways. Then we have Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Yossi Aglili said, no, there's this seva. That's an elderly, learned person. He still thinks it's only learned people. That was the whole question of the Gemara. Is it zaken hashamai, right? Does this include someone who's not a knowledgeable person, just old? So he thinks also it's elderly and wise, but the zaken is actually referring to not the modern Hebrew use of the term zaken, old, but the use of the term zaken in the Torah of wise, talmid chacham. So now we're going to have two kinds of people that are included in this pasuk according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili. It's not just one. We have old and wise, and then we have just wise. So you could be young, 23, and very wise. You're talmid chacham. You, right? The Rambam wrote the whole Perush HaMishnah by the time he was 23. You'd be standing up for him at that age. Okay, that's included in this pasuk. According to Isa ben Yehudi, he has a totally different understanding. He says, what do you mean? It's zaken, is seva, is right, zaken, fine, elder. And there's actually a debate about whether elder means both, they have to be talmid chacham and old, or maybe yanik v'chakim. That's a whole debate, what he really holds about that. But seva is just someone who's old. Okay, what old means is a good question. And this is something we always struggle with, right? With, do you disrespect someone by saying they're old and I have to respect them because then you're putting them in this category, oh, you're old, and there's always that fine line between treating someone with respect, but not making them feel like, oh, you're really old. So, and it doesn't really get into here, like it does in other cases, what age would you be considered old? And what stage of Torah learning would you be a Torah scholar? It's also things that the Sugya doesn't actually really discuss, which are pretty basic to know where you draw the line when someone falls into this category. But Isa ben Yehuda's big chiddush is that this is talking about elderly people in general. It means stand up out of respect, right? Do all sorts of things, help them. We're going to see in the Gemara, they're going to talk about holding their hand when they're, let's say, crossing the street, helping them carry their packages, all sorts of things to help elderly people. And what's interesting about this is, according to Isa ben Yehuda, and he's the one they're going to paskin like, we have two very different things in the same pasuk, really, because you have helping elderly people, which is, often helping them because they need help, right? And they can't help themselves, and giving respect to a Talmud scholar, which is something totally different. Now, you could say it all comes from one and the same. And this is, I think, that really what's going on here, which is an older person. And I know somebody mentioned this, I think, after class yesterday, but it's really, I think what's going on here is that elderly people are wise just because of their years. And it's an element of, and even if you talk about the talmid chacham as a representative of God, I think, there's two things about talmid chacham. Number one, they have a lot of knowledge, and that's why we call them wise. And number two, they're representing God because they represent Torah, and Torah represents God. And I think that the zaken, or this, if you call him the seva, this older person in years, actually has both those elements. Number one, they have knowledge because they've gained knowledge throughout their life. They may not have learned Torah, or they may not be a huge Torah scholar, but they clearly have knowledge of life experience, which is no less important. And number two, they also, in a sense, represent God, because if you think about it, the fact that they live this long is because God is helping them to live that long. And they represent godliness in this world. So I think that both those elements are actually similar between the Zaken and Talmid Chacham, and the older person and the Talmid Chacham, which maybe is why they're together in the same pasuk. If that's food for thought, I could have done that at the end of today's daf as a summary, but I used it here as an intro, and we'll see elements of this as we go through the daf. The daf is going to a little ping pong back and forth between an older person and between a wise person, but we'll see. So we started off yesterday. We had this 3-way machloket that I just reviewed. We have Rabbi Yossi Haglili's proof. He says to Tanakama, if you were really right that there's it should have said, sorry, if you're right, he says, if you said like Tanakama, it should have said Mipnei Seva Zaken Takum. Because remember, Tanakama thinks it's one person discussed in this pasuk, an elderly, wise person. And he says that it would have put them together. It wouldn't have listed them as two separate people, to which the rabbis responded, what do you mean? It wanted to put Zaken next to V'yareta. So we get to that halacha that we talked about yesterday that we'll review again today. So I won't review it right now. But because of that, it put Zaken separately. So that Zaken could be right next to the word V'yareta, you should fear. Tanakama. Now we're starting from the very last word of the second to last line of yesterday's daf of Lamed Bet. Mishum debai lemismach, the last line. The Tanakama my timer. So what's Tanakama's reason? If he was right that it's even young people. You think Rabbi Yosef, there's two different people discussed in this pasuk. One is an older Talmid Chacham, and one includes even a younger Talmid Chacham. Well, then, it should have put the verbs takum v'hadarta by each one, right? Notice one says v'hadarta, one says takum, you should get up, and therefore it must be that they're all one and the same, and just one verb was mentioned by one verb was mentioned by the other, and it's really a poetic form of just saying one and the same thing. But if you were right, it should have said, for a seva, you should get up and hadarta and respect them. Let's just translate it loosely as respect them. And it should have said the same thing by the zaken. And since it didn't say that, shema min achadu, it must be it's all really one and the same. Now so that's the end of the ping pong of how each of them explain their opinion. They don't really explain Rabbi Isi ben Yehuda because he's pretty clear. Seva is seva, zaken is zaken, right? Zaken is wise. Seva is a word generally used for an elderly person. It means just elderly. Amama. Now we're going to go back piece by piece to the Braita we quoted yesterday with all sorts of details of these halachot, okay, and how they're learned out from the psukim, and we're going to raise some questions on them or deal with them. Amar. So now quote from yesterday. You might have thought to keep this mitzvah, you actually have to spend money out of pocket. Therefore, it says, get up, and this word hadarta. This was the bright. Just like when you stand up, you don't spend money. Also, right, it doesn't cost money to stand up. So also hidur must be, again, they're trying to figure out what is hidur? Well, you don't have to spend money to do it. Wait a minute. Standing up doesn't have a financial loss? Of course it does. Let's say you're a person who makes the holes in the pearls. Okay, it's a very specific, right? Or, like a diamond cutter, right? It's a very specific, unique job. And because of that, you get paid a lot of money. Now, if you stop your job for a minute, right? Let's say you're a lawyer who charges X amount of money per hour, and each minute is valuable. You stand up, that's a loss of money for you. Okay? Adahachi vahachi kaim mikame, as you stand up before him, ubatami malachto, you're going to basically stop working. And that is a financial loss. So standing up actually is a financial loss. Ela akish kima lihidur. So therefore, what they say is like this. Kima is like hidur, and hidur is like kima. So how does it work? Ma hidur she'embo bitul. Now, hidur doesn't have bitul. What is hidur? Hidur, so for example, okay, we often hear hidur, and I see you writing that in the chat, by etrog. Okay, you get like a nicer etrog, you spend more money to get a nicer etrog. That's what they thought Hidur might mean. To do something nice, you have to do something nice for this person, right? And that nice thing maybe is spending money on them. Well, they say, but Hidur doesn't have bitul mitzvah. You have to, let's say, buy a nicer etrog. So you have to spend money. But bitul malacha. But you don't have to stop your job to do a Hidur mitzvah. You don't have to stop in the middle and spend your money on your etrog. No, it's when you're done working, you go to the store and you spend money and you buy it. But it's not something that you are supposed to stop your job to do. So therefore, akima she'en babitul. So standing up must be only in a way where you're not actually losing money. So that's, then once they get to that, since kima is now defined as something that doesn't, right? In other words, number one, we learned from hidur to kima, you don't have to stop your job. So if you're a lawyer, you don't have to stop in the middle to stand up for someone because you're losing money on that standing up. But if in that same vein, we're going to say now the following. Since kima doesn't cost money, so hidur is also not going to cost you money. So we're going to learn from one to the other. Mikana Blue, from here they learned, from here they say that people who have specially skilled jobs are not, now I'm going to translate exactly the words, ein rishaim. It sounds like they are not allowed to stand in front of a Talmid Chacham when they're doing their job. Now, this is very strange. You can't. What if I want to? What if I don't care? I'm a lawyer. I bill a lot of money per hour. I can, I can spare to stop for a minute. Okay, I'll lose money, but it's okay. So they say the following. You can't. Now, this is very strange. And Tosfos says, what do you mean you can't? Of course you can if you want to. So there's one explanation Tosfos gives is that if you work for somebody else, then you can't. Because if it's not my hours that I'm billing, but I work for someone and every minute I'm not working, they're paying me for, and then basically I'm wasting their money, that's a reason why I wouldn't be allowed to. So that's one possible explanation. They also suggest that maybe ein risha'in, which translates as you're not allowed to, could be ein chayavin. It could be sometimes translated as you're not obligated to, but if you want to, you can. So there's a debate about how to understand this line. Now they say, Vilo, wait a minute. So what they wanted to say is, since it's not supposed to cause you a financial loss, you're not supposed to take money out of pocket. So therefore, if you're a skilled worker, you don't have to stop, and maybe you can't stop. Now they say, Vilo, is that really true? The Hadran, it says in the Mishnah in Bikurim. Bikurim were the first fruits, and people would bring the first fruits to the temple, and they would walk through the city of Jerusalem. As they were walking, the Mishnah describes, as they're walking to the temple, people, even if you're a skilled worker and you're supposed to stop your work and say to people, hello, greetings, so nice to see you. Our brothers who live in this place, whatever place they live in, greetings to you. So if we stop for people who are bikurim, right? So Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So let's stop for a minute. So then the question is, how could you possibly say we could stop for Anshe Bikurim and lose our money, whether it's our money or our employer's money, waste their money, for Bikurim and for people bringing Bikurim who are just Stam Jews, rather, and not for Talmidei Chachamim who represent Torah? It doesn't make any sense. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, actually it does. Yes, that's a special law in Bikurim, and this is Talmidei Chachamim different. Those people you stop for, those people you don't stop for. So Rabbi Yossi bar Avin, bo re'eh. Now he's going to explain this to us. We're going to have two explanations. One is bo re'eh kama chaviva mitzvah b'sha'ata. This shows you how important it is to do a mitzvah in its time, because this is the mitzvah that was a timely mitzvah, maybe a pre to mitzvot aseh that are timely, right, that women are exempt from. But how amazing it is to do a mitzvah in its proper time. Because these people end up with higher status at that moment than the Talmidei Chachamim. The second answer is maybe that's different. If you go on this walk to Jerusalem and nobody says hello to you and everyone's just busy, stuck in their own thing, well, maybe you won't want to come again. It's an unpleasant experience. So we want to encourage this. So to encourage it, we have people greet them and kind of turn it into something very celebratory. Why we were worried people wouldn't bring bikurim, maybe it's hard to ship them to the temple and it's not an easy thing to do, to make the whole trip. It's not like nowadays you get in your car and you put all your stuff in your car and you drive, right? Or even if you take public transportation, it's still a lot easier than in those days. So maybe that's why. Okay, that was our first. So again, we finished up the first section of the three-way debate between them about who's included in this obligation. Then we moved on to the money issue. Do you have to spend money? Do you have to stop your job? In the end, we say neither. Then we compared it to the bikurim and said they're different. Now we're going to the next part of the Braita. Amar. You might have to get up for him in the bathroom or in the bathhouse. And then we said you don't, because it's not a place of hidur. It's not a very nice, right? It's not the kind of place where there is such a thing as hidur there. Vilo, is that really not true? And now we're going to see two stories where the same person, as we say, hikpid al kvodo, was very upset that people didn't stand up for him in the bathhouse. So here's our story. Rabbi Chia was sitting in the bathhouse. Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe, this big important prominent rabbi, right? He's son of Rebbe. They were all in the dynasty of the Nasi. And he comes in, velo kami kame, and he didn't get up for him. Rabbi Chia didn't get up for Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe. Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe got upset. Now they're in the bathhouse. I thought you don't have to. What did Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe do? He goes to his father. Okay, he goes to the father of Rabbi Chia and says to him, I was his teacher. I taught him 2/5 of 2 books of Sefer Tehillim. Sefer Tehillim is split up into 5 books, if you know that. So there's some split of 5 books in Sefer Tehillim. I taught him 2 of them, and he didn't get up for me. Your son, he's so chutzpah. V'tu, and furthermore, there's another story. Bar Kapara, v'amrle Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi. Not sure who the story happened with. They were also sitting in the bathhouse. Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe comes in, he walks in. Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe, v'lo kami kame, and this, whoever it was, Bar Kapara, Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi, doesn't get up for him. V'ikpid, and he got upset, and he does the same thing. He goes to his father, and he says, Shnei shlish. I taught him 2/9 of Shaniti lo b'Torat Kohanim, in the Midrash Halakha Torat Kohanim. V'lo amami panai. He didn't get up before me. V'amar lo. So the father here has a retort. He says to him, the first story, he didn't have anything to say. This time he says to him, oh, you taught him 2/9 of Torat Kohanim? Shema behen yoshevu ma'achil. Maybe he was thinking about that and he was pondering all the Torah he learned with you while you walked in. He didn't see you because he was focused on his thinking about his learning about all these great things you taught him. And therefore, he didn't stand up for you. Now, what do you see from this? Now, you could just read this as a sarcastic response to him, and saying, enough of your whatever, so great what you taught him. Maybe that's all he thinks about all the time. You think you're so great. But they take it very literally that it's a real, maybe he really was thinking about Torah and didn't notice you. And that's why he didn't stand up. But what do you see here? Sounds like he wasn't saying he doesn't have to stand up for you because it was in the bathhouse. He said because he was busy focusing on something else and just didn't see you. But if it weren't for the fact that he was thinking about something else, maybe it sounds like he would be obligated. So now you see 2 stories, which seems they were obligated in the Beit HaKisei, in the Beit HaMerchatz to get up. So the answer, lo kashya. The bathhouses had the entrance room, like the reception room, and then the inner rooms. And imagine a spa, right? There's where the people sit that accept you into there, and there everybody's dressed properly. Nobody's changing their clothes there. And then there's the inner area where people are changing their clothes, people are wearing towels, people are, already not dressed appropriately. That's already not a place of healing. So in the Gavai, which are the inner rooms, you don't have to get up. But in the outer rooms, you do. And this must have been in the outer rooms. And now they're going to further prove it was in the outer rooms. They're going to strengthen this. But in the end, they're going to reject the proof. But we still really have our answer. Hachinami mistabra, you can also further prove it from here. You can always think of Divrei Torah anywhere you are, other than the Beit HaMerchatz, other than the bathhouse and the bathroom. Now, if that's the case, that the father said maybe he was thinking of Torah, he couldn't possibly have been in the inner room of the bathhouse because you can't think of Divrei Torah there. And therefore, it must be he was in the outer room. But the Gemara rejects this proof and says, what do you mean? We can't always control our thoughts. Dilma la'on seshani. Maybe he just had no choice. Maybe he couldn't control his thoughts and he was thinking about Divrei Torah, even though he shouldn't have been in the inner room in the bathhouse, and therefore it doesn't necessarily prove anything. The fact that it could have been he was focused and thinking about it it doesn't mean he wanted to be thinking about it. It's very hard for us to stop thinking about something. If we, sometimes it happens. You might end up in the bathroom and you're still thinking about something we learned in the daf, and then you say, oh, I really got to get this out of my head. I shouldn't be thinking about it. Sometimes it happens. So it could be that it happened, even though he couldn't control it. And that's what he was saying. In the end, anyway, it wasn't like he really was thinking it. This was just the father suggesting that maybe he was thinking about it. But either way, it doesn't prove anything, but we do have an answer regardless that it was inner rooms, outer rooms. We just don't have a proof for it. Now we said, you might think that you could close your eyes and make it as if you didn't see him. And as long as you don't see him, you don't have to stand up. But the Gemara says that's a weird havamina. Is this Braita referring to a bad person? In other words, are we saying let's say my teacher walks by and I specifically close my eyes right then, I'm not going to see you. That's a bad thing to do. No one would think that that's okay to do. And there wouldn't be a drasha to say you can't do that, because we're not talking about people that would specifically, go against the halacha of make you're like you don't see him. So what does this mean? Ella. Yachol yatzim einav mekame delin tezman chiyuva. Tekimat tezman chiyuva halo chazele dekai mikame. Talmud lomar takum v'yareta. You need takum v'yareta to tell you this. If you see your teacher from far away, and then you say, oh, you know what? I'm going to just focus on what I'm doing, and I'm going to close my eyes or look in my book and pretend I don't see him. At that point, I'm not a bad person because he's not here yet, and I'm not actually obligated yet. So if that's the case, that I do it in advance, and then when the Talmid Chacham happens to be passing by me, I'm so intent in what I'm doing, or close my eyes, and I'm just, pretend I'm sleeping, then I actually don't see the Talmid Chacham when the chiyuv actually kicks in. So that would be what the pasuk is talking to you about. And even that you can't do, it's telling you, okay, then I'm not really an evil person because I'm not doing something I'm obligated in. I'm just creating a scenario where I won't actually be obligated. But even that is wrong because of takum v'yareta, because of the juxtaposition, get up, and then the end of the pasuk says you should fear God. Well, don't do this because this isn't really within the letter, within the spirit of the law. Tana, ezu kima sheyesh bahiduch, ve'omer ze arba amot. Now, when are you obligated in this? It has to be kima that has hidur, which means it's noticeable that you're getting up for this person. What would that be? When they're in the 4 cubits of your range. Okay, they're right within 4 cubits of where you are. Amar Abaye, that, by the way, that's only with your not the rabbi you learned everything from. If it's your rabbi you learned everything from, as soon as you see him, you have to get up. Abaye, and here he actually implemented what he said. He would see the ears of the donkey of Rav Yosef, that he was coming, he would already stand up. Abaye, Havarachiv Chambra. Now we have Abaye in the flip position. He's now the rabbi. He's riding on a donkey. The Kamaske Aguda de Nahar Sagya, and he was going by the banks of the river Sagya. Yativ Rav Misharshi of Rabbanan Be'idach Gisa, and Rav Misharshi and all these rabbis are on the other side. Below Kamu Mekamein, they don't stand up for him. Okay, now they saw him, it's rowing Malo enough. So Amar Lehu, Vilav Rav Muvhakana, he says to them, he calls across the river. Aren't I your Rav Muvhak? Why don't you stand up? Amrule Lavadat. And they said, we didn't see you. Okay, we didn't know. Okay, they said we didn't know, which really means we didn't see you. Okay, we didn't notice you. It was far away. That happens often, where you might see someone, but they didn't see you yet. They didn't recognize you, or right, they didn't realize it was you. So they said we didn't realize. Had we realized, we would have stood up. You have to wonder why all these rabbis got upset at their kavod. It seems like not exactly appropriate, but I think a lot of it was chinuch. They wanted to teach their students, this isn't the appropriate way to be. You have to do things right. And therefore they rebuke them. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Minayin lezaken shelo yetzriach. We're back to these braytot we quoted yesterday. He said, how do you know that a zaken shouldn't bother people to stand up for them, right? If there's 2 paths and one is full of people and one is not, go on the one that's not full of people. Talmud lomar zaken v'yareta. Because the word zaken was next to v'yareta, that's what we ended yesterday. That's why Tanakama says you had to split the seva and the zaken, because they wanted the word zaken next to v'yareta to say not only is it the people who are supposed to keep this mitzvah have to fear God, even the zakenim themselves have to fear God and not create a situation where people are always standing up for them and bothering people to do this mitzvah. Amar Rabbi Naktina, and Rabbi says we learned imakif chay, that if you go around, you will live longer. Abai makif, Rabbi Zera makif. So the 2 of them were careful to always go the way where they would bother the least amount of people. Ravina Havayati Kamed Rabbi Yirmiyah Midifti. He was sitting before Rabbi Yirmiyah Midifti. Chalafahu Gavra V'Lamakase Reisha. So this person walks by while they're sitting learning, and he doesn't cover his head. Now, again, we're going to get back to this hair covering and see another reason for covering your hair. Amal, so Ravina says, Kama Chatzipai Gavra. This guy is really chutzpahdik that he didn't cover his head in front of me. This seems to be a thing. That another reason for covering your hair we saw already, right? Married people cover their hair. We saw that people in general cover their hair to remember that the Shekhinah is above you. And then we have this other thing now coming here that we didn't see before, which is people would cover their hair in front of a rabbi out of respect for the rabbi. Okay, they would specifically cover their hair when there was a rabbi around. So he says that's chutzpah that he walked past us and didn't cover his head. Amarle. Dilma mimata machasya niu digise barabanan. Could be he's from mata machasya. And this is, again, it really depends on where you live. And again, there's different explanations of this, but one explanation is that in their city, there were a lot of Talmidei Chachamim, and therefore they were at a level where there was a certain comfort level. There were too many Talmidei Chachamim that they didn't, every time they saw a Talmidei Chacham, put something on their head. And therefore he's just not used to it, but don't take it out against him. Okay, again, showing that these things of the hair covering were very much minhag based and depended on, where you were and what the situation was. Isi ben Yehuda Omer, mipnei seba takum afilu kol seba b'mashma. Now we're going to get to Isi ben Yehuda, and as I told you, we pass in this way, which is why we always think that this halacha is talking about older people and not necessarily just Talmidei Chachamim, because that's what he says, any older person. Am Rabbi Yochanan, halacha ki Isi ben Yehuda. So Rabbi Yochanan paskins like Isi ben Yehuda, that this mitzvah applies also to Talmidei Chachamim, possibly, like we said, it's not clear whether also young or only old, and to old people in general. Here we're going to hear something very interesting about Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan havakai mikame sabe aramai. Gentile elderly people, he would stand up out of respect for them. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan felt that this is across the board, not just Jews. Okay, this is everybody. Amal, and he said, and here's the good line, and this relates to what we said in the beginning of the class, which is, he says, Kama harpatke adu alayu dahane. How many, however you call this, adventures, trials and tribulations, how many things that, right, he sees this very old person, doesn't matter, he's Jewish, not Jewish. He said, this person went through a lot in life. They clearly, again, now what does this mean? Either it means we should respect them because they're a person with experience, or we should help them because, they need our help, and look, they have a certain amount that they've gained through life, through their life experiences, that puts them on a higher level than the rest of us. Okay, and therefore he says, well, any person who reaches this age, and we don't know what age this is, but whoever gets to this stage, and obviously whatever age it was then would be higher now because life expectancy is much longer, right? So that person is deserving of respect. Rava mekam lokai hidur avidle lehu. So Rava wouldn't stand up, but he would do hidur. So some people say that means he would start to stand up and then sit down, which a lot of people do also for rabbis sometimes, right? Somebody walks into the room, you start to stand up and then sit down. So there's different ways of showing respect. He didn't give them the highest level, but he did show them respect. Abaye yav yad l'sabe. Now we start to get to the issue of helping them. Abaye would make sure that if he saw an elderly person, he would put out his hand and help them walk. Rava mishader shluchim. Rava said, well, I'm busy learning. I'm not going to do it, but I'll send someone to do it. Rav Nachman mishader gozai. Rav Nachman also was like Rava. He sent someone, one of his servants who worked for him to take care of it. He said the following, Amar, ilav Torah, kama Nachman bar Abba ika b'shuka. Now this is again where we have this struggle. He says, listen, if it weren't for my Torah, there would be lots of guys like Rav Nachman bar Abba. Bar Abba means, Nachman, the son of my father. There would be lots of people just like me in the shuk if I wasn't learning Torah. Torah is what makes me unique. It gives me my strength. And if I stop learning Torah, I won't be in the status that I am. And right, not in terms of he wanted status, but his point is I represent Torah and I have to deal with learning Torah, and I can't stop to go help elderly people cross the street. But I will send someone to do it because I think it's important that it get done, but it doesn't have to be done by me. It's very interesting that Abaye went himself to do it and wasn't so makpid on the loss of Torah he was going to have from doing this. But Rava and Rava and Rav Nachman did send other people. So they did think it was important, but not important enough that they should stop learning to do it. Amar Rabbi Aivu, Amar Rabbi Yanai. Turning now to Amar Bet. Ein Talmid Chacham Rashai La'amod B'fnei Rabo ela shacharit v'arvit. Well, when your rabbi comes into the yeshiva, you're learning, you only have to stand for him morning and evening, twice a day. You don't stand up every single time he walks into the room. Well, what's the reason? Very good reason. You don't want to respect him. He's like a representative of God. Well, you can't respect him more than you represent God. Now, you might say, well, we daven 3 times a day. But what they want to say is you say Kriyat Shema. That's why it says Shacharit and Arvit. You say Shema in the morning, you say Shema at night, twice a day. So you're not going to give more respect to your rabbi than you give to God. So basically, morning and evening. Now, Tosfot says, this doesn't make sense with the sugya of Rava, that he was all upset that they didn't stand up for him. And, maybe they already stood up for him once that, in the morning that day. So he basically says, the first Tosfot on the Daf, Tosfot suggests that maybe this is only, and it's just interesting to learn about, that in those days, there were people who lived in the rabbi's house, and there were others who learned like in a yeshiva. So he said, maybe this is referring to the people who live in the rabbi's house, because you can assume that they stood up already in the morning, and therefore they don't have to stand up for him during the day. But he adds this whole element of what we like to call maris ayin, right? Marit ayin, that it might appear, okay, regular students have to stand up every time the rabbi gets in the room because people won't assume they already did it in the morning, and therefore it will look like they're not standing up for the rabbi, and that shows disrespect. And then he says, even the people who live in the rabbi's house, if new people come into the yeshiva, Beit Midrash, whatever it is, and don't know that they live in the rabbi's house, they also have to stand up because you don't want it to look, right? There's this issue. Because one is what your obligation is. The other is what it's going to look like to other people. If people see you don't stand up for the rabbi, either they're not going to respect the rabbi as much, or they're going to start talking about you. This guy doesn't stand up out of respect for the rabbi, and that's going to be a problem. They don't exactly say what the Marit Ayin problem is here, what people will think, but it's clear that there's some sort of issue of what others might think. At least that's according to Tosfot's reading. So again, there's a lot of elements going on here. That's what I wanted to show you. All these things, just like Kibud Hava'im, right? They're very complicated and nuanced. And the Gemara can't get into all the nuances, but they do discuss a bunch of them. And we're going to see some interesting ones later in today's daf, which actually they don't answer, which really leave us with, some big questions. Meitive. So now they bring a contradiction to this, to the fact that it should only be morning and night, and you don't have to do it any more than that. Well, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, what did we learn before? Minayin lezaken shelo yatriach. The zaken is to make sure not to bother people very much and take the path where there's fewer people. Talmud Lomar zaken b'yareta. So Iyamar shacharit v'arvit bilvad. If you said it's just twice a day, amay lo nitrach. So we'll bother people twice a day. That's not a big deal. Chiyuvahu, right? Like, why shouldn't he bother them? They're obligated to do it twice a day anyway, so he should bother them. Just that twice a day. Elalav kula yoma. It must be. The issue is you have to do it all day long, and that's why they have to be careful, right? Every time the rabbi walks in, everyone's going to have to stand up. It's going to keep interrupting everybody's learning all the time. So it does sound like it's every day, and that's why they have to be careful not to walk in, walk in places where there's tons of people. To which they say, no, no, that source could still be believing that it's only morning and night, and still, they shouldn't bother people even for that. Okay, they should be careful to avoid as much as possible interrupting people's daily life. Amar Rabbi Elazar. So we're going to see a whole slew of things that we're going to say about someone who doesn't do this. If you don't stand up for your rabbi, and here they even say a Talmid Chacham who doesn't stand up for his Rav, what's going to happen to him? He's called evil. He doesn't get long life, and he won't live long. And he'll forget his Torah. Where do we get this from? A pasuk in Kohelet. Okay, good will not be for this rasha, for this bad person. He will not extend his days. The days will be like a shadow, right? Fleeting. What's wrong with this person? What did he do wrong? He doesn't fear God. What does this have to do with standing up for elder, for your rabbi? Well, we don't know what this fear of God is, but let's look in the Torah. Our pasuk says, stand up for elderly people and for the zaken, for the rabbi. And then it says, that must be, this is part of fearing God, is giving respect to your teachers. So, okay, that's what it is. Standing up for your teachers is fear of God. And that's why you will not have long days. You'll be called a rasha, and you will forget your Torah. And that is derived from that pasuk. So now they say, wait a minute. That's not the only pasuk in the Torah where it says Yareta Me'elohecha. Here's 2 more examples. Why don't we say it refers to that? Ve'ema mora'at ribit. fearing God when it comes to not taking interest on loans, not giving loans on interest, umora'at mishkalo, and not cheating people when it comes to the weights and measurements when you're charging people money, and don't put some extra heavy weight to make it look like their potatoes were 5 pounds instead of 2 pounds. So there it says, fear God. So now they say, Rabbi Elazar, Pnei Gamal. Well, the pasuk here says in Kohelet, Enenu yarei milifnei Elohim, and our pasuk said, Mipnei sevat takum. It's the same root. So because the same root appeared in both psukim and both have yirah, so therefore it's the drasha is said to be about this. Now we get to our slew of questions that a lot of them we're not going to have answers, or at least the first two, which are really based on one and the same case. Ibailahu, beno v'hu rabo. What if you have a situation where the son teaches the father? He's the rabbi, and the father is a student of his. So now the first question is, ma'ulamod b'pnei aviv. Is he obligated to stand up for his father? His father really, right? The last question is, the father have to stand up for the child? First question is, does the child have to stand in respect for the father? Tashma, let's learn from here. Da'amar le'Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda. Shmuel, remember, was the Rav of Rabbi Yehuda, and he said to Rabbi Yehuda, Shinina, the same the word we saw with him yesterday, Kum mekame avuch, go stand up for your father. Which means, right, the assumption is Rabbi Cheskel learned Torah from Rabbi Yehuda, and yet Shmuel told him, go stand up for your father. They say, no, Shani Rabbi Cheskel, the Baal Ma'asim Hava. He might not have been, now here we get to other things. It's not all about Torah. He was a Baal Chesed. He always did good things for other people. He was a doer. And because of that, right, and how do we know this? Not just did Rabbi Yehuda have to stand up for his father, but Shmuel, who is the great Shmuel, Rabban Shmuel, the greatest Amoraim, he would stand up for Rabbi Cheskel because he was a Baal Ma'asim. So, well, then why was he telling? If Shmuel himself would stand up, why was he telling Rabbi Yehuda to stand up for your father? Of course, it's his father. Of course, he should stand up. If Shmuel would stand up, that doesn't make any sense. Why he told him? Well, what he was telling him was the following, a little more complicated than what we thought. You might have a situation where your father walks behind me. So you're facing me. Your father's behind me. I don't see your father, so I don't stand up for him. But you still have to stand up for him, and don't think that it's disrespectful to me that you're standing up for someone else in my presence. And that must be what he was telling him. Anyway, you can't learn from this, and we don't have an answer to our question. Do you have to stand up for your father if your father learns from you? You're the rabbi of your father. Next question, like I said, based on this, same situation. Does the father have to stand up for the son? Tashma da Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, ani kedai la'amod mipnei bani, ela mishum kavod beit hanasi. Yoshua ben Levi says, I really don't have to stand up for my son, but I'm going to because he married the Nasi's daughter. So he's part of the Nasi's family. Out of respect for that, I'm going to stand up for him. Now, what can we derive from here? Good question. They're going to try to derive something and then say, no, that's not what he meant. He meant something else, which doesn't give us an answer to our question. So what they're going to assume is that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi was saying, Tama da ana rabbe. The reason I'm not I wouldn't normally need to stand up for him is because I'm his Rav. But but if he was my teacher, I would have had to stand up for him. In other words, in the end, I stand up for him because he's part of the Beit HaNasi. But were he my rabbi, right? The point is, I'm his rabbi, and that's why if he wasn't part of the Beit HaNasi, I wouldn't have to stand up for him, but I do because he is. But, right, if he was my rabbi, I'd have to stand up for him as well. That's the assumption, even though it's a weird assumption. It's exactly what Gemara is going to say. No, you can't necessarily be this source this way, in which case we're going to be left without an answer again. So that would presume that if he was my rabbi, I actually would have to stand up for him. But now they say no. Hachi kamar. What he said is this: Ani eni kedai la'amod mipnei bani afilu hu rabban. I don't have to stand up for my son, even if he's my rabbi. Daha ant avua, because I'm his father. However, there is one thing that causes me to stand up. Ela mishum kavod beit hanasi. Kavod beit hanasi is greater. We saw this yesterday, by the way. That even if a Rav can be mochel on his kavod, a Nasi can't. In the end, we changed that also, but the hierarchy was Nasi is higher than Rabbi, because a Nasi usually is Rabbi and Nasi, okay? And there's an element of respect here. It's interesting, he was even just part of the family of the Nasi, and he was deserving of that respect. So anyway, this doesn't teach you anything, and we're left with both those questions are unanswered, which are really interesting questions, I think. Ibailahu, next question. Rachuv, this is a kind of funny question. Rachuv kamalech dami olam. The whole idea here is that, yeah, and yes, I was thinking also, it sounds like royalty, right? This really sounds like the whole royalty. And if you're writing, the whole idea, when a rabbi walks into the room, you have to stand up for them. If they're just stationary, it doesn't seem like there's this obligation. But when they walk into the room, you have to. What if they ride in on a donkey? Is that considered walking or not walking? Okay, so because the rabbi is actually sitting, the donkey is moving. So, but the donkey's carrying the rabbi. Does that mean the rabbi's moving? That's the whole question. Amar Abaye Tashma. Let's learn from here. Now we're going to learn from laws of a leper. Tamei Yoshev Tachat Ha'ilan. Laws of leprosy are the following. If there's a special drasha from the pasuk, if a leper is sitting down under an overhang, and you're under the same overhang, you'll become impure. It's called Tumat Oel, but it's a unique kind of Tumat Oel. It only works when they're sitting. So now, if someone impure is sitting under the tree, Vitahor Omed, and you stand under that tree, you become Tameh, because we don't need you sitting, we need the Mitzorah sitting in order to transfer impurity. Tameh Omed Tachat Eilan, but if the impure person is standing, Vitahor Yoshev, and you're sitting, you stay Tahor, because you sitting has no effect on it. And there, as long as they're not sitting, it doesn't work. Ve'im yashava tameh, but if he then sits down, hatahor tameh, then you'll become impure. And here's the important part. V'chein be'even hamenugat. What does that mean? What it means is, if I have a stone that comes from a leprous house, now the stone is in my hand, so the stone is sitting in my hand. But if I'm standing, we won't pass on impurity to you under that same tree. But if I sit down while the stone is in my hand, then I'll pass on impurity to you, even though I'm not a leper, right? The stone is. Now, what do you see here? It goes by what's carrying it. The person carrying it is the one who we judge sitting or standing. Likewise, we're going to judge the donkey or the horse or whatever he's riding on. Is that sitting or is that moving or stationary? And if that's moving, then you're considered moving because you're in it. Okay, here it's weird because we're comparing the person to the stone, not the person to the person, right? So if you're riding, it's as if you're walking because it goes by what's holding you. Okay. We all know this answer. Do you have to stand up with the Sefer Torah? Yes, of course. Every time we take the Sefer Torah out, everybody stands up. So Rabbi Chilkiah, Rabbi Simon, Rabbi Elazar, Amrei Kavachomer. It's a simple Kavachomer argument. If you stand before its learners, then obviously you're going to stand before the Torah itself. The teachers are representing the Torah. Rabbi Eli, Rabbi Yaakov, Razavi, Havuyatve, Chalaf Azar, Rabbi Shimon Bar Abba, V'kamu Mikameh. So now, they were sitting and learning. Rabbi Shimon Bar Abba comes and they all stand up. Amar lehu chade, he says, what are you doing? One, atum chakimim va'anu chaver. You're the ones learning and I'm, right? You're the Talmidei Chachamim. I'm just a chaver. I'm not a Talmid Chacham. Ve'od, klum Torah omedet b'fnei lomdea. You're sitting there learning. What are you getting up before me? I'm not even learning. So, Savar Laki Rabbi Elazar, the Amar Rabbi Elazar, Ein Talmid Chacham Rasha La'amod b'fnei Rabo b'sha'ah she'osek b'Torah. Okay, and he must have held like Rabbi Elazar, who said, you can't stop learning to go stand up for your rabbi. Okay, that's not something you do because you're learning Torah. You don't have to get up for someone who represents Torah learning. Layit ala Abaye, but Abaye cursed him and said, what are you talking about? People have to stand up out of respect. You see, over and over, Abaye was very careful about this halacha from the other stories as well. Last thing for today. He beat to on the end of this whole sugya, and with that, we're going to get started with Mitzvot Aseh Shazman Grama in tomorrow's class. He beat to Achorei Moshe Abo Ahohel. This is a bit of a strange pasuk. It's after the whole thing of Cheda Egel, and then it says they watched Moshe walk to his tent. Big machloket about this pasuk. Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, Chanamar leGinai, v'Chanamar l'Shem. One said this was they were looking after Moshe in a bad way, and they don't even. Okay, we're going to see in a second. Manda Amar leGinai Kidita. As it says, they don't even want to write this because it's so negative about Moshe. It says he was fat, he was this. They're looking after him. Rashi quotes it. You can look there. Okay, they were kind of looking after him and saying, oh, you know, who's he to become our leader, like the Korach kind of thing. And Manda Amar l'Shevach, okay, so one said it was they were looking after Moshe with a lot of respect. So what does that mean? Amar Chizkiah, Amar li Rabbi Chanina, Bered Rabbi Yavau, Amar Rabbi Yavau, Amar Abdimi, Demin Haifa, Chacham over omem lefanav arba amot. If a rabbi, and now we're going to learn these laws again, we mentioned this before, but if a chacham passes, you have to stand from when he gets into your 4 cubits. And when can you sit? After he passes another 4 cubits. Av Beitin, if he's in a higher status, he's ahead of the court. You have to see from far, right? As soon as you see him, you have to stand up. And then you have 4, he walks past you 4 amot, you can sit in. But Nasi Ovel, which is Moshe, okay, he's like the Nasi. As soon as you see him, you get up. And you wait until he sits in his spot, and then you sit down. And where do we learn this? From that pasuk. They waited till he sat down in order to, before they were able to sit down. Okay, so what we saw, again, I'm not going to summarize because we kind of summarized this already from the beginning and talked about the main ideas. And, but we seem to have 2 different things going on here, which they kept being intertwined. We talked about the Zaken, and then we moved to the Chacham, and sort of intertwined. And I gave my suggestions at the beginning of class why they might be intertwined. From here, we're going to start the section of Mitzvot Aseh Shazman Grama, great after Rosh Hashanah, because it starts off with what are Mitzvot Aseh Shazman Grama? Sukkah, Lulav, Shofar, V'tzitzit, V'tefillin. Shofar is the Mitzvot Aseh Shazman Grama. You can listen to tomorrow's class to understand why it is that you should go to shul on Rosh Hashanah, even though you're exempt from Tkiyat Shofar. Obviously, the second day there will be shofar blows this year, not the first day. And there's also an article on the site from Deracheha about women in shofar, so you can read that also as well, which has the more halachic aspects. Okay, with that, we'll finish. Wishing everybody Tivah v'chatima tova, Shana tova, and both shiurim are already up on the site, and you can already learn them now for Rosh Hashanah.